Thank you for being invited here in Riga. Can you understand me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'd like to take with you a trip to the Netherlands, to the big palace of Het Loo and the royal estate around it. And we will talk about the park and the gardens of Het Loo. I've been working there for 40 years and for a long time as a head gardener. And now I'm a consultant at Het Loo. And well, many things happened in recent years. So I'd like to tell you something about it. Well, Het Loo, there is not only one Loo. It's a very big estate. It's the largest estate in the Netherlands. It covers around 11,000 hectares, completely in the center of the country. And it's a crown property. It's not private property of the royal family, but there's a special regulation about it. The royal park covers an area of around 650 hectares, and it's quite a natural park, but with a lot of cultural layers. The palace of Het Loo, it's a large palace, it's now a museum. There is a Baroque garden behind it, and a very well-kept garden, and you can see the total difference, the quite natural park and the recreated Baroque garden on the right. Het Loo is actually it's a medieval estate. It was the first castle was built in 1430. Later on in the 17th century it was bought by Prince William of Orange, and he created this large summer palace and a hunting residence. And well, since then it had a royal history. The formal gardens lasted until the end of the 18th century, and they were measured in 1806 when the French occupied the Netherlands and the brother of Napoleon became King of Holland. And this is the situation you see just before it was changed into a landscape park. And the fantastic thing about modern technology is you see on your right on the screen you see the LiDAR picture, and you see the elements of the landscape. On the left, the Ice Age valleys formed more than 200,000 years ago, and you still can see the layers of the formal gardens and other elements in the gardens, as then all the waterways there. This is the oldest building in the park, and this is the castle Het Ouderloo. Quite a large castle. It is restored, but it started in 1430, and the present appearance is as it is rebuilt in around the 1500s. It was restored in the 1970s, and now it's the royal retreat, the royal summer residence at Het Loo, and it's frequently used by the royal family. It's a lovely building inside, and it can entertain about 60 guests. They can stay there overnight, and it's still a royal presence at Het Loo. There is another villa at Het Loo owned by Princess Margaret. She's the aunt of our present King Willem Alexander. So, Het Loo is not only a museum, but there is still a strong presence of the royal family. The most important people, William and Mary, William III, Prince of Orange, and his English wife, the daughter of King Jacob of England, Mary Stuart. William III said, I have two passions in my life, hunting and garden and landscape architecture. And that was he did. He inherited some palaces and castles from his father, William II, but he wanted to have a palace and a garden of his own. And he bought Het Ouderloo Castle, not because he loved this castle so much, but it's the only hilly area in the Netherlands, and it was possible to make fountains and waterworks in the park. One of the very few places in the Netherlands which is relatively flat. And so he started to build this new palace, and with expensive waterworks. The waterworks only have cost more than the garden alone. A bit later, he started as a prince and with his wife, Princess Mary. And later on in 1688, they were asked to go to England. They both had an English descent. And to become King and Queen of England. And so in 1689 they were crowned King and Queen of England, which of course enabled them to enlarge the palace, to make the palace much larger, and to create more palaces in England and in the Netherlands. This is Het Loo Palace in the 1970s. It has always been inhabited by the royal family, and the last monarch who lived there was Queen Wilhelmina, the great grandmother of our present king. And as you can see, the outlines are still as they were in the 17th century, but the palace was white plastered, and you don't see a Baroque garden, but you see a landscape park. At the end of the 18th century, the palace was looted in the uprisings of the French Revolution. Which also had to do something with the Netherlands. 1806, the brother of Napoleon, Louis Napoleon, became King of Holland, and he had the palace restored, plastered white. And 100 years later, the palace became larger. An extra floor was added, and some extra buildings were added, and it was used as a summer residence still by the royal family. The landscape park was designed by Alexandre Dufour. That was the court architect of Napoleon. And this park lasted until the 1970s and 1980s. Queen Wilhelmina was the last monarch who lived at Het Loo. Her daughter, Queen Juliana, had her own summer palace, Soesdijk, and she didn't want to use Het Loo. So the state decided that in cooperation with the royal family, that Het Loo should become a museum dedicated to the House of Orange and its ties with the Netherlands. And then the discussion started, what shall we do with the palace? It was a house more than a palace, and it was not fitted at that moment to become a museum. So many discussions and meetings started, perhaps like today, what shall we do with Het Loo? In the end, the decision was made to restore the palace back to its 17th century proportions. And another discussion started, what shall we do with the gardens? The landscape garden and the trees in the landscape garden were relatively old and not in a very good condition anymore. And after excavations, it was discovered that the entire Baroque garden was still hidden under this landscape garden. It was decided to recreate the Baroque garden, the formal garden, and this was the result. In the upper garden, which is also part of the formal garden, you still see the remains of the landscape garden. That was because Queen Juliana, by then the Dutch queen, was not very happy with the restoration. She saw the palace of her youth changed into a museum, and part of the garden of her youth, which she loved, disappear. So she insisted that all the trees in the upper garden who could be left there should stay there. Many of them have died in the meanwhile, but there are still many trees left, and so that was the influence of the queen. We talk about the late 1970s and the early 1980s when this garden was recreated. Gardens, especially formal gardens, they need a lot of maintenance, and new insights also came to light, and we had to do a lot of replanting, and we decided to look again at the gardens and to make a new plan. What helped, that was in Germany, in the archives of the Bundeswehr, the German army. A plan was discovered, made by the Prussian king when he was one of the heirs of William III, and he had a plan made from Het Loo, and actually that was the oldest plan that we yet know. According to this plan, the upper garden was recreated, and we also knew it was a grass garden, and it was not a garden planted with box. So what we did, I'm talking about 2007, 2008, that we have recreated this part of the garden. Well, and I think it's a beautiful addition to the former garden. Well, what happened then? In the upper garden, on the outlines, we had to plant 20,000 new box shrubs. But what we feared is that the box blight, the box disease, which had already hit so many gardens in France and other parts of Europe, also hit Het Loo. And on the left, you can see the result. In weeks, the entire planting of these 20,000 box plants became ill, and we had to fight the disease with all kinds of chemicals. Of course, you don't want to do that, but that was the only way to save these little shrubs. 1 year later, there was a big flood in the garden, 115 millimeters of rain in 1 hour, and the entire former garden of Het Loo was flooded, and the disease was spread all over the garden. 300,000 box plants, and they were all infected with this box blight. What a disaster. Well, we started searching for replacement and for alternatives, as there were no healthy box available at that moment. So we ended up in Bad Zwischenahn in Germany, and there were already plots planted with all kinds of box and all kinds of evergreen shrubs who can be used as a replacement for box. After some discussions, we have planted parts of the garden with Japanese hollies, Ilex crenata dark green. There was another reason to replant the garden. After 25 years, the old box hedges were rather shrubby and didn't look very well. And all the edging in the gardens made of plastic by then, in the 1980s, they were not in a good condition anymore and had to be replaced. So, luckily the state organizations for buildings supplied us with a lot of money, and the entire garden could be recreated. And after research, this parts of the gardens look different than before. One thing I didn't want to use again was plastic in the garden. This artificial material, it doesn't fit, and you can see how it works after many years. And I do want to have corten steel edging in the gardens. Once if it's planted, you don't see it anymore, and it's stable and also sustainable. We went back to the already known plants from the early 18th century, very detailed plans of the parterres, of the box hedges in the garden, and they were translated into modern plants, and they were executed like this, with the corten steel and later on with the planting of the hedges. And also the color schemes did fit completely with this early 18th century scheme. Here you can see the result, the 1980s garden with the rather thick box hedges, much more plants than actually used in the other plan. And you can see the result of the recreated garden, and this is what happened in around 2012, 2013, and in 2014 the entire garden was recreated. Here you can see the result of the second reconstruction, the second renovation of Het Loo. To me it looks much more greener. We also changed the outer parterres in grass parterres as described. And you can also see Het Loo as a very green area close to the big city of Apeldorna. When Het Loo was built, Apeldorna was just a small peasants' village with farms and sheep and so on. And now it's a city of 160,000 inhabitants. But Het Loo is still a very green area. It's a protected area, it's still a royal domain. And it won't be possible to build new houses or anything else on the area, and I think that's a very lucky thing. Another fine picture of both the old and the new Baroque garden. I say old. On the right side you see the garden as it was planted in well, I have to think, 1983. And the other side, as it was planted recently, and it was finished in 2014. So exactly according to the early 18th century plans. A close look at the parterres. We have in the old garden more than 300,000 box where plants were used, and in the new garden I think only 150,000 hedge plants, in this case ilex were planted. And we have reused all the stones and all the materials. Unfortunately, the red stones can't be found anymore. The quarry where they came from is closed by now, so we have to take care of the old stones. Well, the new approach of the garden with all this steel edging also enables the gardeners to work on a more safe way. In the old situation, all the hedges were clipped by hand, and of course that's not very good for your backbone. In the new situation, the hedge scissors are made onto a kind of a yeah, how do you call it, a kind of a handle, and the gardeners can stand upright, and well, the work is much more friendly for the backbone, and it's more easier to do. Almost everybody can use these machines. After the clipping, the leaves are sown from the gravel, so the garden stays where it should be, and the leaves are taken from the garden. Very efficient. On the other side, there are big slopes around the garden. Of course, you can't mow them because they are too steep to walk on. They used to be mown with a rope and the machine hanging on this rope, quite dangerous. And already some years ago, we developed a machine and fitted on the tractor, so the grass can be mown from the tractor without any inconvenience for the people who are working with it. Well, still a lot of work and still a lot of manual work in the garden. We stopped in 2014 with all the chemicals in the garden. We do not use any herbicides anymore. We do not use any fungicides, and we do not use any chemicals to kill insects and so on. But this also means that there is a lot of manual labor in the garden. We have more than 20 gardeners at the moment to work in the formal garden and the surrounding area. It covers about 60 hectares. But we also have a lot of volunteers. It's quite popular in the Netherlands to work with volunteers. And we have a group of 35 mainly elderly people who are coming every week for about 4 to 5 hours and to help us picking the weeds in the garden. On your left side, you see our oldest gardener. She is 90 by now, and well, she refuses to go. She does still likes enormously to work in the garden, and I think we have to carry her out on a certain day. This is another project that is not yet ended. Even the avenues in front of the palace, there are 3 big avenues and another avenue just in front of the palace. And the first trees were planted in the 17th century, and they were in a very bad condition. 4 years ago, an enormous oak dropped into the palace with a lot of damage. Luckily, there were no people at that moment. And the beech avenues in front of the palace were also in a bad condition. Het Loo is situated on sandy soil, and the soil is there are not many feeding sources in the soil, so you have to prove that the roots of these trees were not in a good condition anymore, and even the trees became dangerous. So we started with a plan to replant all those avenues. And well, what you can expect, there was a lot of action against it. People around the neighborhood, they didn't like these old trees to be removed. But well, it was not safe to leave them anymore. In the meanwhile, we have raised young trees from seeds from the old trees. So you can't stay closer to the originals on another way. And here on the left you can see the young trees on the nurseries, and on the right side you can see them already planted near the palace. We are 2 years further now. The trees are already growing quite rapidly, and under the trees we have sown a lot of wildflowers, which is, I think, good for the soil and also good for the wildlife and the biodiversity. And it's much loved by the public. And you don't hear any complaints at the moment anymore. Back to the Royal Park. We have just talked about the main garden, the formal garden behind the palace. It's only 7 hectares. Well, it's the last garden, but the Royal Park is much larger, 650 hectares. And the part of the park that was designed in the 17th century also covers 200 hectares, and it was enlarged over the ages. What you see on your left looks rather romantic, but if you are looking at the map, you see a starwood, which already came from the 17th century, and you can still see these lines on these LiDAR pictures. That is fantastic, and it's amazing that although it does look very romantic, actually it is a 17th century garden. The folly in the center is 19th century and made of wood. Still, it's not preserved because it needs to be rebuilt every 40 years. It's made of natural wood from the woods, and within 40 years, all kind of ants and small animals will eat this wood, so you have to replace it. But it's unique that it's still done. Within the park, it was planted. Parts of this park were planted in the 19th century, and on your left you see this romantic park idea with poplars, spruces, and even little flower beds and a little island. On the right side, you can still see the same situation. The folly, this little seat is still there, also made of very natural materials. It's also replaced about every 30, 40 years. And actually the situation hasn't changed. Even this little island is still there, but it's overgrown. And you have to start a discussion, what shall we do? Shall we take away a lot of trees or leave it in its natural conditions? There is a lot of wildlife, of course, and you just can't chop down all the trees and replant it. Another part of the Royal Park, very close to the Baroque garden. Actually, these ponds came from the 17th century and were reshaped in the 19th century in the landscape style. You see the results on your left side 200 years ago and how it looks now. And it's not exactly the same, but I'm happy there is still this landscape park. Around 1870, 2 beautiful wooden chalets were placed on the edge of the lake, and they are still planted in the 19th century way with fuchsias from our own collection. And this is a much loved spot by the public and also by the royal family. Our present king, Willem Alexander, he celebrated his goodbye as crown prince on this spot in 2013 with his colleague crown princes in Europe. And so it still has a lot of meaning to the royal family and not only to the general public. But it's good that it's used by all of us and also still by the royal family. This enormous park, 650 hectares, it was slightly overgrown in the last 60, 70 years. Queen Wilhelmina, who was the last monarch who actually lived at Het Loo, she refused to chop down any trees or to prune them. Only when a tree died, she even wanted the dead tree to leave it as long as possible. So you can imagine what happened to the park. It was overgrown, and at a certain moment it was more a piece of woodland than a park. Queen Beatrix, the mother of our present king, she is very interested in art and architecture, and she saw that something had to be done with the park. And she asked Michael van Gessel, famous landscape architect, but also a good friend of the royal family, to have a close look at the park and to make a new master plan. This is one of his plans, and this is actually the headlines from the formal garden into the park. What he did is first to investigate what were the open spaces in the park. This is a very rough investigation. I think made around 2000, and he made a new plan, and that's what you see here. If you think of this the picture that we saw before with these Ice Age valleys, he opened up all those Ice Age valleys, and it gave a spectacular new look at the park. And on the right side of this picture, you see all the historic lines in the park, both from the formal period and also from the landscape period, to come back. You don't change a 650 hectare park in a week or in a year, and it's still his plans are still executed, and they are leading in the maintenance system in the park. This is one of those Ice Age valleys. It was completely overgrown, and you even couldn't see it was a valley, and he chopped down not all the trees, but much of them, and he left the trees on top of the hills, and this gives a dramatic effect that that what is low, that it's good visible, and even the height of the hills is more pronounced by it. It's a lovely place to walk, and I think it's more visited after his work. There are a lot of small kennels in the park. The first kennels have been dug around 1517 to feed the water mills. They belong to the old castle. And later on in the 17th century, William of Orange, William III, he did want to have running water in his gardens, and he actually succeeded in to create a fountain of 13.5 meters, by then the highest fountain in Europe. And all those, the lines of all those waterworks are still visible, and all those little kennels are still there. It looks romantic, but it is a 17th century piece of work. There are also 3 fortresses in the park, not from the 17th century, but they are a kind of exercise fortresses from the 19th century. There was another William III, King William III, and he liked the military activities, but he was not actually in the military, and so he built 3 fortresses in the park, so he could he could exercise with real soldiers, real fortresses, and real cannons. Yeah, royals are still somewhat strange sometimes, but the fortresses are still there, and they are overgrown, and they are quite beautiful, romantic spots nowadays. This is the character of the Royal Park, a complete difference to the formal gardens, and a lovely place. You don't see much lawns, you see natural purple heath, wild grass and blueberries, and an open park landscape, which is very fine in every season of the year. And I think he did a great job, and if I already told Normunds and other people who want to come, you really need at least 2 or 3 days to visit the entire property and to experience all of it. I will end with the new box plantings. We are still busy with this formal garden. After the Japanese holly, nowadays it's possible to plant box again. New box varieties have been developed from Asian species, and they look almost the same as the old box, and they are doing well. Here you see 2 varieties, and we have replanted 2 gardens with this new box. So, there is never a dull moment with the garden, and also with the formal garden, and I think we have solved many problems, and I hope we can go ahead in the future. So, thank you for your attention.